The sun was sinking low, painting the dusty border town of San Duro in strokes of red and gold, when the auctioneer's hammer echoed across the wooden boards of the platform. The air was heavy with silence, broken only by the occasional whinny of horses tied along the corral and the hushed murmurs of townsfolk who had gathered to witness what had become a cruel tradition. One by one, young women, orphans, wanderers, those with no family or fortune, had been brought forward and sold as brides to ranchers, miners, and lonely men who called the unforgiving frontier their home. It was not love that drew the bids, but survival. And by the time the evening shadows grew long, only one figure remained on the platform. She stood there trembling, her cream dress covered in the dust of the long road she had traveled, her eyes wide with fear and defiance all at once. Her name was Clara. The auctioneer's voice cracked as he tried to draw the last bids. "Who'll take her? Who's got the coin for this fine young lady?" But the crowd was tired, restless, and cruel whispers floated like smoke on the breeze. "She's too thin," someone muttered. "She's too proud," said another. Clara's heart pounded as she looked at the crowd of faces, each one a stranger, each one a potential fate. She dreaded more than the last. Her fingers curled into her skirt, and though her body shook, she held her head high, refusing to let her tears fall. She had no family left, no protector, and the thought that she might be left behind, unwanted even here, was almost worse than being sold. And then the sound of a single chair scraping against the dirt reached her ears. From the edge of the crowd, a tall figure stepped forward, his broad shoulders casting a long shadow in the glow of the setting sun. He wore a weathered coat, his hat pulled low over a face marked with scars not of flesh, but of life itself. His eyes, dark and heavy, told of battles fought, of dreams lost, of nights drowned in whiskey and silence. The townsfolk knew him well. He was Luke Harrow, once a rancher with land and promise, now a broken man who kept mostly to himself, nursing grief that no one dared ask about. For years, Luke had walked like a ghost among them, and no one expected him to raise his hand. Yet in that moment, his hand rose, steady and sure, holding a silver token of bid that caught the fire of the dying sun. The crowd gasped. Whispers surged like a sudden storm. Harrow? The broken cowboy? What does he want with a bride? But Luke said nothing, his jaw set, his eyes fixed not on the auctioneer, not on the crowd, but on Clara. For the first time all day, her breath caught, because in those eyes she did not see greed, nor pity, nor cruel amusement. She saw recognition, as though he understood her fear, her loneliness, her desperate fight to keep her dignity in a world eager to strip it away. The auctioneer, stunned into silence for a moment, quickly slammed his hammer down. "Sold!" he barked, his voice trembling with excitement. "Sold to Luke Harrow!" The crowd erupted in murmurs and disbelief as Luke stepped forward, his boots striking the dirt with steady resolve. Clara's knees weakened as he approached, not from fear, but from the weight of relief and confusion tangled together. He reached up and offered his hand, rough and scarred, but steady. She hesitated only a second before placing her trembling fingers in his, and he guided her down the steps, through the dust, toward his waiting horse. The murmurs followed them like shadows, questions neither of them cared to answer. As he helped her onto the saddle, Clara pressed her hand to her chest, her heart racing not from terror anymore, but from the unspoken question that had just begun to take root in her soul. Who was this man who saved her from despair, and why had he chosen her, the last bride left, when he could have walked away like all the others? As the town's eyes burned into their backs, Luke mounted behind her, his strong arms securing her as the horse stirred beneath them. Without a word, he raised his hand high, as though to silence the whispers, and then with a sharp nudge, the horse carried them into the fading horizon. The dust rose behind them, and Clara dared to hope that this broken cowboy who had claimed her might carry secrets that would one day mend both their shattered lives. The ride out of San Duro stretched long into the night, the only sound the steady beat of hooves against the dirt road and the distant cry of coyotes on the ridge. Clara sat stiffly in the saddle, every muscle tense, her mind racing faster than the horse beneath her. She could feel the weight of Luke Harrow's presence behind her, silent and solid, his arm resting firm across her waist to keep her steady. The man had spoken not a single word since the auction ended, and the quiet pressed heavy on her chest. She had been sold, yes, but not in the way she had feared. Something about the way he had looked at her lingered, in her mind like a flame refusing to die. Still, she knew nothing of him, only the whispers she had overheard, of land lost, of a family buried, of a man shattered by grief. At last, when the moon climbed high, they reached a small homestead on the edge of a valley. The cabin was worn, its wooden walls scarred by storms and years of neglect, but it stood tall against the wind. Luke dismounted first, his movements deliberate, then helped Clara down with the same steady hand he had offered before. She glanced around, unsure if this was to be her prison or her refuge. He led her to the porch, where a lantern flickered in the night air, then finally broke his silence. His voice was low, gravelly, but steady. "You don't owe me anything," he said. "I didn't buy you to own you. I couldn't stand to see you left there." Clara froze, the weight of his words sinking deep. She searched his face, shadowed beneath the brim of his hat, and for the first time she noticed the sorrow carved into his features. The kind of sorrow that made a man forget how to live. "Then why?" she asked softly, her voice trembling. He looked past her, toward the horizon, where the valley stretched wide and silent. "Because I know what it's like to lose everything," he whispered. "And I couldn't let it happen to you." The silence that followed was not heavy, but tender, like a wound finally being touched with care. Clara's heart ached with questions, but for the first time in years she felt safe. As the night wore on, Luke showed her the cabin, the corral, the land that had once thrived with promise. He spoke little, but each word was honest, stripped of pretense. She saw a man who had been broken by loss, but who still carried the strength to protect. She felt the stirrings of something she had long thought impossible, hope. In the days that followed, Clara learned of Luke's past, how his wife and child had been taken by fever, how he had buried his dreams beneath the earth along with them, how he had lived each day since as a shadow. She listened, not with pity, but with quiet understanding, and in turn, he began to see her not as a burden or a reminder of sorrow, but as a light he had thought forever lost. Though their bond began in tragedy, something new blossomed between them with each passing sunrise. By the time the townsfolk spoke again of Luke Harrow and the bride he had taken home, the whispers had changed. They no longer spoke only of a broken cowboy, but of a man who had found a reason to stand again, and a woman who had found strength in his silence. Together, Clara and Luke began to mend the fractures of their past, building not just a home, but a life born of courage, respect, and the fragile beginnings of love. And so, in that border town where she had once stood as the last unwanted bride, Clara's story became something else entirely, a story not of being sold, but of being saved, not of despair, but of hope rekindled. And for Luke, the cowboy who had thought himself broken beyond repair, it was the story of how raising his hand at that auction had been less about buying a bride and more about finding the one person who could remind him how to live again.